I think we only had like 5 or 6 tournaments a year, and if you didn't do good in those, win some money, man, it was a struggle.
It started off at 10,000 winner take all in 1971, and then it jumped to 25,000.
You know, you win that one tournament, you don't need to win no more money, because I could live on $20,000 for 2 or 3 years.
It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and better.
And certainly it was a prize that every one of those men wanted to take home.
This is beautiful Lake Texoma, and it's the site of the 1979 Bassmaster Classic.
We had the Classic there at 79 on Lake Texoma. It was an outdoor weigh-in. It was just like any other tournament. There was very few people there.
And it was just a great classic. I mean, even though we only had 30 people at the weigh-in, because we weighed in right there at the lodge at Texoma, and I think those were all press and our families. Maybe there was 100, I don't know.
The Texoma Classic, we were in Denison, Texas, and there must have been 800 people maybe at an outdoor weigh-in, maybe 1,000 at the most. So the pageantry of the Coliseum weigh-ins and all that didn't exist at this time. It was just kind of a down and dirty outside, drive the boat up, and you're in the boat, and get out with your bag of fish.
The boats would drive up and just be surrounded by crowd. The crowds were not nearly as big as they are today, but nonetheless, in those days, it was a very exciting event because of the newness of it for all of us.
One of Ray's strong suits really is the thinking up something for somebody to do at the Classic, and he tried hard to make it interesting and exciting.
Well, they've got all this entertainment, they've got food, they've got people that you're expected to meet to make all this effort that Bass has put together work.
He didn't skimp. Ray put on a classy tournament. They got bigger and bigger, and he didn't cut corners. He didn't cheapen things. He made them the best that he could possibly make them, and it showed.
We had a lot of good entertainment. We always had good entertainment. We had good food. Of course, Ray's going to have a good time anywhere he goes.
Every year he tried hard to have special entertainment that would be interesting, and was successful at that. The Classic was an exciting place to go. And
he went all out to make it a big event, not only for the participants, but for the riders and for anybody that observed. He wanted to make it the class act that it was and that it still is today.
Ray Scott was instrumental in growing the sport of bass fishing, but in that first decade, it was up to the competitors to keep the dream alive through perseverance.
I think we only had like 5 or 6 tournaments a year, and if you didn't do good in those, win some money, man, it was a struggle.
It was kind of like a sport that paid a little money, and we were just thinking more of expenses and making a living at it.
It started off at 10,000 winner take all in 1971, and then had jumped to 25,000, and it was the biggest prize in fishing at that time.
I just didn't think that I would ever be able to have a chance at making a good living fishing, and then the purses that came along in 77, 78, and 79, you know, you win that one tournament, you don't need to win no more money, because I could live on $20,000 for 2 or 3 years.
And certainly it was a prize that every one of those men wanted to take home, because 25,000 in 1979 could stake you for quite a while.
$25,000 was a lot of money in a check, but within probably 2 to 3 weeks after I had won the Classic, I had made more than that in endorsement opportunities, and I mean, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and better.
You had this sense that we were seeing a sport evolve.
When you think about 25,000 in, and now you look at, you know, prizes up to 550,000, and that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, and that's where the sport ought to be, and so it's getting there.
It's really neat to actually have been raised in the sport and see it grow from what it used to be to what it is now, and then think about the potential in the future. It's pretty awesome.
Coming up on Bassmaster Classic Yearbook.
Texoma is one of those unusual lakes where you can go catch any kind of a fish that you want to catch.
I was not impressed with Texoma at all. I can't understand why a bass would even want to live there.
The snakes were bad. I mean, you'd see them laying on logs, you'd see them laying in trees.
They must have been foul. It was eerie.
The Bassmaster Classic was held at Lake Texoma in the fall of 1979. This 89,000-acre impoundment is known for its fishing, but not just for black bass.
Texoma is one of those unusual lakes where you can go catch any kind of a fish that you want to catch. It's got some Kentuckys in it, and it's got a real good population of largemouth. And if you get right down around that dam, you can catch some big old smallmouth down there.
Tough fishing. A lake that is known nationwide is one of the best striped bass, white bass lakes to be found anywhere.
They catch a lot of big stripers down there, and it's known mostly for its white bass population, the sandies. They take those things with the millions out of there, and it just continues to produce.
It's just flat loaded with them. There's the water there has a high saline or salinity to it, which they reproduce in there real well. There's a lot of fish, a lot of stripers in that lake.
Generally, where there's stripers, they compete with the bass for the food that's there. And my opinion is stripers don't do a bass lake a bit of good.
That might be the reason the bass stay shallow there a lot, because I don't know that they can compete with the stripers for the food that's out in the main lake.
The lake is one of those lakes where they made the mistake of putting the stripers in, and the stripers reproduced on their own.
Early on, the biologist said, oh, the stripers won't hurt their open water feeders. They feed wherever there is food. It doesn't matter if it's open water or on the shoreline. They're like coyotes. They eat whatever they can catch, wherever they can catch it.
It's a man-made reservoir on the Red River, and it's got a lot of shallow flats. It did have some back creeks with wood. No aquatic vegetation in it, which really suited my style of fishing.
It's got a lot of different conditions in it. And it has from willow trees to stump rows to rock points to gravel points to muddy water to clear water. So when you got all them thrown in one lake, and it ain't just one clear lake or one muddy lake, it makes a big difference.
Basically, it's a big lake, but it's got what we call in the fishing world, it fishes small. And even though it's a big body of water, it doesn't fish big, and because it just has limited largemouth water in it. It doesn't have any grass beds out in the main lake. Just a handful of big creeks that really hold any decent populations of largemouth bass.
The very best creeks are up on the Oklahoma side. We launched out of the Texas side, which meant you had to cross the wide open water, very susceptible to wind.
Bass scattered. It's not what I would call a classic bass lake. It's even under the best of circumstances, I don't think it's a great black bass lake.
I was not impressed with Texoma at all. I can't understand why a bass would even want to live there. It was not a pretty piece of water. It took me 3 days, and the fishermen that I fished with about 3 days to even catch a fish. It was very difficult fishing.
The thing that I remember the most about Texoma, I remember my buddy Woo Dave. He zeroed all 3 days. I'll still remind Woo of that when he gets to when he wants to give me a whole rash of bull.
I finished dead last, which I think was 25th, because I only took 25 back then. But I looked at that, and I was still ahead of 275 other fishermen that were sitting at home, so I was glad to be there.
Woo's one of those guys that he's a scrapper. I mean, if he couldn't catch him, I mean, it meant fishing was tough.
You have a lot of willows and brush and everything, but the water's down. Every time it seems like we go there to fish. You're looking up at that pretty cover, but it's on dry land. And so it's not a lot of structure out there.
It was just nothing but clay and sand or something. There was just nothing there.
On a scale of 1 to 10, bass fishing wise, it's barely a 5 at times, and sometimes it's not even that.
In the fall of the year, nature is in full transition. It was never more apparent than in the back of the creeks at Lake Texoma that year.
I fished the second day of the tournament with Hank. So we got into this thing, and I looked, and there's these snakes, black snakes, and they're mating, and they're all over the banks.
I've never seen anything like that at all in my whole life. I've never seen so many cottonmouth.
Back in those creeks, you know, that's where you're going to encounter alligators, you're going to encounter a lot of snakes. I saw numerous water moccasins.
They must have been 1,000. I mean, they were just wads, and it was eerie.
But the snakes were bad. I mean, you'd see them laying on logs, you'd see them laying in trees.
And they're just coiled amongst each other. You know, they were like 3 or 4 and coiled. And he says, no, your job is to make sure those snakes don't get in the boat.
They were striking the boat. They were very aggressive.
And he said, well, I'm fishing these little things, and he says, and the fish get tangled in there, and I have to reach down and get the fish out. I want you to keep your eye on the snakes. And I says, you don't have to worry about that. I said, both eyes will be on those snakes.
I think I caught 2. One, I flipped the worm up there under a bush, and boy, I got a real good hit and jerked, and it was a cottonmouth. And I was, nah, man, I got to get back out of here.
And I was the most tense 4 hours that I had ever spent. There were snakes all over the place. They were on both banks and just coiled, you know, and they sit there in the water like this, looking at you.
Some of the guys who came in there, you know, kind of excited about how many snakes they'd seen swimming around or laying up in the bushes or whatever. Certain places, it was a challenge to get around them, I guess.
I didn't like that at all, but you maybe kept some guys out of there.
Up next on Bassmaster Classic Yearbook.
Gary Klein started me quite young. I think he was a teenager.
His mom co-signed a note with him, I think $2,000.
I was on a budget. I was on a real strict budget.
Gary knew it was going to be a rough ride.
I was committed. I mean, I really, really wanted to be a bass angler.
Klein himself, who is today one of the genuine superstars in this sport, was in his first classic in 1979 out of Oroville, California.
Gary Klein started me quite young. I think he was a teenager, as I recall. And his mother was a booster of his.
His mom co-signed a note with him, I think $2,000 at a bank. And he had a year to pay it, and he had an old Dodge van and an old Terry Bass boat.
It was a strip cargo van. I had a little cot inside the van tied with rope so it wouldn't slide, and I had all my tackle up underneath it. But I was on a budget. I was on a real strict budget, and everything went for basically fuel and entry fees.
He spent that money, he camped in that truck, he lived in that truck, and he ate peanut butter sandwiches, and he fished all year long.
When I left California, I left with $1,000, no credit cards. And I had prepaid entry fees to 2 BASS tournaments, and back then the entry fees were $250. And the first one was on the St. Johns River in Florida, and the second one was on Lake Powell. And I felt that by doing that, if I didn't do any good at those two, then I'm pretty close to California. I'd go up and over the hill and go back home.
I think it was in a Florida tournament that he was just about down to his last nickel and things, and placed enough to get gas money to get back, to get to the next tournament.
I think I got a 10th, 1 Powell, a 7th, a 17th, and a 20th, and like a 5th. I mean, it was just a great year.
Gary knew it was going to be a rough ride, and sleeping in his van, it was tough, making ends meet. But he believed in himself, he believed in his technique, he believed he could do it.
He was so determined to become a professional angler. Everybody was watching him very carefully, because in 1979, in addition to winning a tournament as a rookie, Gary was runner-up in the Angler of the Year race to Roland Martin, of all anglers, certainly an already established superstar.
Roland and I were battling neck and neck for Angler of the Year all year long. I led it after Lake Powell all year, and Roland beat me the last day at Lake Millwood. And again, I think that was by 1 pound and 8 ounces. I finished second in the Angler of the Year, so I had a really good year.
So here we saw a fisherman that, even at a young age, had dedicated his life to becoming a tournament pro.
I was committed. I mean, I really, really wanted to be a bass angler, and I want to be the best that I feel I can be.
It's going to be, I'm really looking forward to it. I think I can weigh 20 pounds plus.
a lot of the guys felt like Gary was really arrogant and a bragger and a boaster and all this and that, because Gary tell you, he said, "You gonna do any good?" "Oh yeah, I'm gonna catch him tomorrow." "Yeah, you bet." "Yes sir, I'll have a limit, probably weigh 15, 16 pounds.
The first impression I had of Gary was that he was real pompous. That he came out with a statement that essentially that there wasn't anything to this.
Yeah, he was one of those little cocky Californians that came into our little circle, you know.
That was his first Classic, and Gary was really a different guy, you know, and he really made a lot of bold statements that he was going to win that Classic, point blank. And so a lot of people looked at Gary as very arrogant, but he was very confident.
I kind of got a bad reputation at my very first press conference there. I'll never forget this as long as I live. One of the press in the crowd raised his hand and asked the question, "Who do you predict will win the Classic?" Well, I mean, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to. And I heard later that, well, that didn't go over very good in that press conference, you know, because you were being pretty cocky. And I said, "What do you mean cocky?" I did, you know, they asked me who I thought was going to win it, and me. And that's what I was there for, is to win.
Gary was just one of those guys that was so sure and so confident of what he could do. He wasn't being arrogant. He was just telling you what he was going to do.
He was a breath of fresh air. We were glad to see him coming because he had just a different way to look at it, look at how the whole approach to bass fishing.
Gary had more fishing talent than you could shake a stick at. It was unbelievable how talented he was, and on top of that, he's become such a good representative for the sponsors.
I knew immediately he was going to be a great fisherman, and he had his mind set to do what all he's done. He's won about everything you can win.
You know, a lot of times a guy comes out and wins a tournament pretty quick, especially back in those days. We had a lot of people that won a tournament and you never heard from them again. Gary showed his consistency by hanging in there year after year.
He's the type of guy that will tell you anything you want to know, and you can put it in the bank if he tells you. He's just as honest, just a great guy, a great guy.
Up next on Bassmaster Classic Yearbook.
So he asked if he could borrow mine, because I think back then you could bring 5 rods to the Classic. I brought 5 flip sticks. He did win it on my rod.
Yeah, that's the stupidest thing Klein ever did, giving him that flipping stick.
Hank didn't know a thing about flipping, really.
I didn't know how to flip, but I beat them flipping.
Tournament leader Hank Parker began the final day of the '79 Classic with confidence. As the day progressed, he saw his hopes slip away.
All I thought was, don't get excited, don't start running, be calm, go in there. You know the fish are there, you know how to catch them, you've got it figured out, and if anybody's going to catch a big bag today, it should be you. And I went with that attitude. Wasn't until about an hour before time to quit that those thoughts started going through my head. Hey, you may have just stayed in here too long. This may have been your demise. There could be some big strings. You could lose this tournament.
Hank went into the final day with a lead of more than 10 pounds, and most people were saying that he could just sleep in, that he didn't even need to go fishing. As it turned out, he only won by about 3 pounds over Basil Bacon.
Here's Basil Bacon, and he's got a sack full of fish. This may cause serious trouble for Hank Parker. And the word is, at least we understand it, that Parker may have only caught 1 fish today. If that's true, this could be a photo finish.
You know, they weigh you in kind of based on where you're in the standings after the first 2 days. So if you're leading it, then you're going to weigh in toward the end of the last day. And I tell people that that's a lot like being on death row. I mean, God, to wait, sit there with an hour and a half while everybody else is weighing in, not knowing the outcome, it's really, really stressful.
Hank Parker could have stayed in bed this morning and still would have won the tournament.
Had Basil not zeroed on the very first day, it very well may have had a different outcome to that tournament, because obviously he had, on the second day when he brought in over 13 pounds, figured out what he was doing wrong, what he needed to change, and had made that change very successful.
I could have lost that Classic. Basil Bacon and some of those guys caught some good strings that last day, and I only caught the one. I did lose a big fish the last day. I came back out and I threw a spinnerbait on a little limb and hooked about a 5-pounder and lost it. And I thought, boy, that may be the kiss of death, but it wasn't.
Hank's Classic win was attributed to a relatively new technique called flipping. But without the help of a fellow competitor, history may have been quite different.
Hank Parker didn't even bring a flipping rod to the Classic. He came prepared to catch him on a spinnerbait. I remember Hank talking about it. Texoma is made for spinnerbaits and buzzbaits. He said that's all you need at Texoma.
You know, at that time we were limited to 5 rods. 5 rods, 5 reels, and 10 pounds of tackle. That was it. So I had a cranking rod, a Carolina rod, and kind of a makeshift flipping stick. It was a telescopic rod like a flipping stick, but it was actually a cranking rod. It was way too limber, and I ended up breaking that rod about the last hour of the tournament the first day. And didn't even have a 7-foot rod then. I ended up borrowing a Fenwick flipping stick from Gary Klein.
So he asked if he could borrow mine, because I think back then you could bring 5 rods to the Classic. I brought 5 flip sticks. He did win it on my rod.
Yeah, that's the stupidest thing Klein ever did, giving him that flipping stick. He'd never won that tournament.
That just shows what sportsmanship goes around, comes around in these kind of events.
This is one thing that's really unique about this sport. I always like to just say, well, that's fishermen.
This is a band of brothers, I guess you would say, as far as sportsmanship and that type thing. But to give one of your 4 rods that you have to a fellow contestant is certainly an attribute to sportsmanship.
The story was his wouldn't fit. Well, I don't buy that. He didn't bring it because he didn't think flipping was going to be good. I know better than that. That's a good way to borrow one. That's what that is.
Well, I won't argue that. I had a flipping stick that was kind of a makeshift, but I wasn't a flipper.
Hank didn't know a thing about flipping, really. I remember it like it was yesterday, and he actually learned to flip during this Classic.
Well, I'd like to say to Gary and Larry both, I didn't know how to flip, but I beat them flipping.
It's all over. The Lake Texoma experts were wrong this time. There were no record catches, but one man, at least one man, isn't complaining.
My excitement, my enthusiasm was pretty high, and it'd been a dream. All my life, I'd sit around in my spare time and my moments that I could daydream, and I'd dream about Hank Parker and winning the Classic, and dream about Ray Scott and from Denver, North Carolina, or at that time Clover, South Carolina, Hank Parker and holding up the Classic. It's been a dream my whole life since I was like 14, 15 years old. And here I am, 23 years old, and winning the Classic, and it's just very, very exciting.
This has been a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports.